Hey everybody and welcome to Chairman of the Board. Today I'm going to be talking about Court of the Dead Mourners Call, which is a board game for 2 to 5 players. It's a dudes on the map style game where you're going to be trying to control these different areas. You're going to be drafting cards and using different abilities. Now the game, I backed the game on Kickstarter in 2018 due to those factors. I like a lot of those mechanisms I just mentioned. I also am quite familiar with the intellectual property that the game's based on. I like the comics, I like the lore, I like the artwork from the Court of the Dead. I think it's a really cool, interesting, interesting property. But what most intrigued me about the game was this idea that there was these two kind of collective or communal objectives or tracks that people had to kind of manage in order to, be as influential as possible on the board without hurting yourself and hurting others in return. I'll touch on that in a bit. So let's talk about what the game actually kind of involves mechanically, what you're actually going to be doing. So the game is kind of broken up into these 8 different phases, and they're pretty simple phases, but there's kind of a lot of different individual parts that kind of formulate the game together. So the first part of the game is you're going to basically roll these dice and you are going to whatever the result is, you're going to divide this number of etheria into piles. And that etheria is kind of going to be your fuel throughout the game for taking actions. You can like buy new models with them, you can buy new cards with them, you can do kind of different stuff. And so the idea is that the first player, who's going to be in control of death, which is an individual model that lets you break a tie in the game, which is quite a cool idea. He is going to divide these different piles of etheria into piles equal to the number of players plus 1. And the kind of twist on that is that the person who divides it up is going to be the last person who gets to pick the pile of etheria. Now, thinking about it, I was thinking, okay, there's got to be something more to that, because why wouldn't you always just divide them as equally as possible? Because if you're going to be choosing last, you're obviously going to always be taking the smallest pile. And it turned out that is actually how the game works, which I was quite surprised about. I thought there should have been another interesting twist to it. Now, that being said, I should mention that you can choose not to take a pile of etheria and take faction influence instead. And that influence is going to, again, give you more kind of power in the game to move your figures about and stuff like that. And also you get points according to how high up on these different tracks you are, because you've got 3 different kind of guilds in the, or factions in the game: the Flesh Guild, the Bone and the Spirit faction. And again, they've all got their own individual tracks, and the highest you are up these tracks depends on how many points you're going to get. So instead of taking a pile of etheria, you can choose to take 2 influence of up 2 different tracks, or 2 of the same tracks, I believe. Now, again, that's something that's, okay, there's a bit more to it there. But again, I didn't really find in the game that was ever really an option. It was always take the etheria and take the biggest pile of etheria possible. What I would have liked to have seen is maybe, make it more viable to choose the smaller pile. Maybe you could make up for it, maybe make up the difference between the piles in influence, or maybe, I don't know, maybe if you were death, you got to, do something else or something, I don't know. It's just, it needed to be something more to this. Now that being said, when I said you divide the etheria into piles plus 1, it's because any kind of remaining etheria that isn't taken is put into what they call like the Death Forge, which is going to be one of those tracks I was relating to or mentioned earlier, when at the end of kind of the phases, you're going to basically tribute a certain amount of etheria to the gods, and if you meet a certain threshold, you get rewards, and whoever bids the most gets points and stuff like that. But I'll touch on that in a second. But first off, yeah, the first phase I was almost a bit disappointed with, because I thought there should have been a bit more interesting decision there. It almost seems like it's going to be it's just a bit rinse and repeat. There's not much thought or not much choice that goes into it. That being said, this is a very, very small portion of the game and not really that important at all. But just a little nitpick I had there. I thought, why not just roll the dice and divide it evenly as possible, if that's pretty much what you're going to do anyway. So second off, after you've done that, you're going to draw what's called a Wallace card. Now, a Wallace card is going to give you kind of a short-term objective in the game, or for the round of the game. The game typically lasts around 3 rounds. Basically, the game ends when you run out of these Unity tokens, which again are going to be points at the end of the game. Now, these Wallow cards are going to, as I said, give you short-term objectives such as maybe have a certain amount of influence. And if you fulfill that, you can reveal this card and do what it says on there. It can give you like a bonus or a discount on something or something like that. Now, these are pretty cool. I don't mind these at all. But I did find them a bit too, I don't know, a bit too leading. Now, I'm probably being hypercritical here, but the idea that you are given this objective and, if you don't stick to it, then you're probably going to be out of pocket. So I'd like to maybe draw a couple of them or have a bit more kind of autonomy on what you're going to do on your turn rather than just sticking to the Wallows card. Now, like I said, you don't have to, but, you're probably best to do it to be as, as efficient as possible. Now, that being said, some of these Wallows cards are different. You get like artifacts and different stuff like this. And you also get like rakers. And these rakers are kind of these monsters that attack different areas on the board, and you have to get rid of them at the end of your turn by having a model on there and using an action to fight that model. And basically, it's just a pure roll-off. I think on a 1, 2, or 3, you fail. On a 4, 5, and 6, you beat the monster, and you get the reward that's on the card, which I think is normally Unity. If you can always also spend your Etheria to up the kind of pip value of your dice as well. So you've got a bit of mitigation there. If you've got a lot of Etheria, pretty sure you can absolutely annihilate the bad guy. Like I said, I would have liked, and sorry, there are also other things down the line that you can do to fight those rakers as well. But again, just the straight off roll to resolve dice roll it's just a bit dated. It's not much to it, and it's just a bit flat in my opinion. But again, I'm more of a Euro gamer. A lot of these kind of Americanized dice rolling mechanisms fall a bit flat with me. And this was just one of those aspects of the game that did fall a bit flat for me, is those rakers. Okay, so that's kind of the Wallows cards. And after that, we go into the draft, which is a bit of a kind of a more significant moment of the game, because you're going to divide up these really beautiful tarot-sized cards, all with these different kind of court members from the Court of the Dead property. And those cards you're going to have an equal amount each, and you're going to pick one, pass them on, pick one, pass them on, just as a tried and tested draft mechanism. And all those cards have 2 different abilities on them. You can kind of do something, or you can kind of maybe get Etheria, or you can get influence, or you can raise up one of these different tracks, as I mentioned. Or some of them also let you place one of the characters, Malavestros, on one of the locations that let you kind of shut that location down and stuff like this. So there's a lot of those cards, and as I said, they're absolutely amazing artwork on them. They're really beautiful cards, absolutely phenomenal production on those cards. But again, I almost felt like all the abilities were so kind of, I don't know, they didn't feel significant enough. They didn't feel like, oh, I really want this one. I was like, I don't really care which one I pick because they're all right, And again, they're all quite flexible as well because they all have 2 abilities on that you can choose. I never really felt like one of those cards were like, oh, I need to have this one. It's brilliant. And then I was never scared of giving anything away to my opponent to, for them to use it against me or for them to have it, which is a bit disappointing. I think with drafting games, you really need that feeling of, I need to take this or I need to stop someone else from having it. And it didn't really have much of that for me. That being said, that some of the cards are quite versatile. I mean, you do get all the different kind of leaders relating all to the different factions. You've got, as I said, you've got the Malavestros one that lets you shut a location down or stop someone's Mourner card. You've got the ones that you can take death, which lets you basically be first player and break ties or break a tie. But again, I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more powerful, just feel like you're really exclusive compared to everybody else. And again, I didn't really get that with this. So after you've drafted your cards, you've got your Wallows cards, you've got your Etheria, you're going to be prepared to go into the actions phase of the game. Now, the actions phase of the game is kind of the main portion of the game where you're going to take one action and pass to the next player, and everyone's going to take one action one at a time until you kind of pass, or every player passes in a row, basically. Now, this is, again, I found this a bit flat because a lot of the actions you take are very insignificant. I mean, not all of them, But most of them, as I said, you either buy a figure and place them onto the board, and by that you raise what's called the dread script, which limits how many options you can, or how many people can go on each location. But again, I'll touch on that in a second. You can reveal one of these Mourners cards, which have abilities on them. Well, some of them are pretty cool, to be honest. Some of the Mourners cards are more interesting than the Wallace cards, and I think Mourners cards are even more interesting than the court cards. So you can play one of those Mourners cards. You can play one of the court cards you've just drafted. You can move your figures around by spending influence, depending on where you're going. So there's a lot of things you can do. But what I found on your turn, the decisions aren't really there. It's more of a matter of what's the most sensible way of playing my cards in order, because some might say, I don't know, some might rely on one card to be played first before you get the maximum benefit of another. And for me, there was never really that what am I going to do next mentality. I was never overwhelmed with decisions. I was like, it doesn't really matter out of these 4 options I do first, because they don't really affect each other. It doesn't affect anybody else either. And because you're taking one pretty insignificant action at a time, it does seem to drag on a bit. You just kind of do your one bit, wait for it to go around the table, do your one little bit and wait for it to go around the table. It seems a little bit drawn out for me. Now, again, it sounds like I'm being very, very, very negative here, and in a way I am, but I'm just being honest on how the way I felt the game kind of felt, and the vibe of the game just felt a little bit long, a little bit drawn out in this action phase, and just not enough kind of, dynamic decisions, not enough big momentum swings, and no big kind of crunchy, nothing to stamp your authority on the game. It's just very small little bits here, get a little bit of influence here, get a little bit of etheria, move a figure or two. It was never like, bam, I'm doing this, deal with that. And that's what you kind of want with a game like this, especially with all the figures and all the production value, because that side of the game is absolutely out of this world. The production value is phenomenal on this game. The board looks amazing, it's huge, it's absolutely one of the best boards I've ever seen. The player boards are absolutely brilliant. All the coins you get are really well made, like metal pieces. The figures are okay, the models are okay. I'm not much of a model man myself, but these do the job, and they're pretty okay to distinguish from one another. But yeah, I just felt like the action phase was just a bit drawn out, and you just feel like you want to do more on your turn. So once all the players have all passed the turn, and then you're going to go into the next phase, which is what I call, or what I mentioned with the Celestial Tithe. Then this is where there's a chart on the board, and all the actions you've taken is kind of manipulate this board to go up or down. And basically you need to tribute a number of etheria equal to the number of players, add a certain amount depending on where you are on the chart. Now this is done on a blind bid mechanism, so you're going to take all the etheria you've got left in your hand at the end of the game and blind bid, and whoever's kind of, well, if you meet the kind of threshold, whoever's bid the most gets quite a bit of unity. Whoever just contributed something gets unity, and if you don't contribute anything, you kind of lose something. And the higher this kind of gets on the track, you stand to lose more on this. Now this is actually one of the aspects of the game I quite like. I like blind bidding, and this does that quite well. So no real problem here at all. And to be honest, I quite like it. I like how much you're going to store, or how much ethereal you're going to carry over to your next turn, how much you're going to use for the tithe, and how much you're actually going to spend on your action turn. So this is a part of the game that I actually quite liked. Now the next part of the game is the dread script. Now this is the second kind of communal track. Now this track is extremely influential in the game, because you basically, there's a chart again, and depending on how high up you're charting one, depends how many people can be on each location. So it might start at 3, so if you have more than 3 people on a certain location, they have to roll a dice, and if they roll a 1 or a 2, they're sent back to your player board, which means you're going to have to spend more time to get them out onto the board. And again, whoever's kind of got the majority in the area is going to get the benefit from that location. And those location bonuses are maybe get unity, or get more etheria, or get influence depending on how many figures you've got, or draw cards, or stuff like that. And this part of the game was extremely, I think it feels quite tense on paper, and it looks quite tense on paper, but when you've just gone through that really long action phase, and then it's resolved by just rolling a dice, within a split second you can take your models back off. Now, again, that feels extremely abrupt and just felt very flat with my group. I think every person who rolled and took the models back wasn't like, oh my god, I've just lost out. It was like, oh, that's annoying. It was more annoying than it was tense, or it wasn't a good kind of frustration is what I'm trying to say. It was very anticlimactic. After all the long drawn out action phase, you can just get taken off in just a second. That being said, obviously it was somewhat the player's fault that the track was so high, and it's players' fault that they're being greedy by all trying to get the same prize. But again, after all the work you do, just to be taken just like that falls a bit flat for me. So yeah, I wasn't too keen on that part of the game, which is probably one of the bits that actually really drew me to the game. Didn't work the way quite I anticipated it to. So after you've done that, you go on to resolving the locations. Now this is where whoever controls those regions by having the majority of figures in them, then they are going to reap the rewards from those locations, and also from the guilds as well, because all the different figures you can recruit all have their own guild, and they all kind of reap their own reward for having the majority in that guild. So again, this felt like a bit like the court cards for me. All the different locations didn't feel strong enough, and they didn't feel unique enough to really want to fight over them. I wasn't really fussed about where my workers went. I just went where nobody else went. And I ended up absolutely annihilating the score because, I don't know, it just didn't feel, nothing was really enticing. Nothing was like, I really have to have that spot and I can't afford not to have it. There was nothing like that. It was all like, you know, again, little trickles up the boards and stuff like that. Just not enough meat on the bones. It was just very namby-pamby little decisions, and it just didn't feel right. The guilds were a bit better, actually. I think the guild influences were a bit more interesting, especially the one that lets you take the token that actually completely saves you from the dread script, which is extremely powerful. And again, that's what you want. You want those feelings that you have to have something. And if you don't have it, you're at a massive disadvantage. And there was only like a couple of locations that felt like that for me. And after that, you kind of count how many unity there is left, and if there's any there left, you go into the next round. And then you clean up for the next round and go again. So that's the kind of the flow of the game. Now, I know I sounded very negative on that, and I want to clarify that this isn't a bad game at all. It's not a bad game. It's just not a particularly interesting game either. Now, from a visual standpoint, from a production standpoint, this is out of this world. It's one of the best looking games I've ever seen, one of the best produced games I've ever seen. It is really deluxe, extremely luxury product. And the table presence is immense. But the gameplay itself is just a bit meh, very flat, very mediocre for me. It's not like, I must admit, I am more of a Eurogamer, as I said, and these kind of games generally aren't my forte. But that being said, I love some games in this genre. I really enjoy Eric Lang's designs, and this kind of, I thought this was going to be more on that kind of theme, but less kind of smashy and more kind of thinky and more political, whereas it wasn't at all. Eric Lang has really kind of got the iron grasp on this genre, because I'm sorry, this game just doesn't compare to his designs. Rising Sun and Blood Rage are way out of the league of this product, which I'm really disappointed to say, actually. So yeah, decision-wise, it was just a bit flat for me. The balance of the game was okay. I mean, everything seemed very reasonably well balanced, but not in the point where it was interesting. The card drafting, was okay, but again, the cards are just a bit boring. So mechanically, it worked fine. It was a bit choppy in terms of being so divided into so many phases. It would have been nice if it had more of a free flow to it, but I can understand why it does kind of lay out the way it does, because they are very distinct phases. But again, they're all pretty simple in their own kind of respect. The game is kind of touted as lasting about 90 minutes to play, and I have to say I think that is a bit of an understatement. I think it will generally go a bit longer than that, and it feels quite a long game as well for what it is. I think it took us about 2 hours to play, and it felt every minute of that, to be honest. It did feel like quite a long game, especially with the actions turns feeling so long. Replayability wise, you've got a lot of cards in there. You've got a lot of Wallace cards, you've got a lot of Mourners cards. You've also got like hidden ulterior motives, which you choose at the beginning of the game, which give you points at the end of the game, depending on how well you do. So you've got a bit of variability there. You can always choose your different factions and get kind of different tiny little benefits as you take cards and stuff. But I think every game is pretty much going to feel the same because, as I said, there's not enough differentiation in those 17 court cards, for me anyway. So yeah, replayability, I've got no real urge to play it again, to be honest. Yeah, sorry to say. Interaction-wise, there's some small take that in the game with some of the cards, like such as steal, steal a few like influence points of somebody, or force someone to pay to the tithe and get influence or unity and stuff like that. And obviously you've got the kind of struggle of fighting over the different guild majorities and fighting over the locations. But overall, the kind of interaction wasn't great. Because, as I said, if it's a draw on a location, you both just sit there stagnant. There wasn't enough kind of, enough kind of savvy and guile to get your way over the other players. There wasn't enough mind games or anything like that. It was just very much, you're going to do what you're going to do and just hopefully nobody else is on the spot you're in. I said visually and aesthetically and production-wise, out of this world good. I don't want to touch on that again. I cannot fault how good this game looks and how well it is produced. You can just see it for yourself. It is absolutely amazing. And the theme-wise as well is good. You get all the characters from the Court of the Dead, IP in this. You get all the big characters, all the artwork, even all the smaller characters in the Mourners cards and stuff like that. So you've got a lot of the theme injected into this. I love the way the game looks. It is, as I said, one of the best boards I've ever seen, and it's like got that lovely kind of matte look on it, but some of the areas are kind of shiny as well, like the river. It looks brilliant. It does really look good, and it's huge as well. And setup and teardown time is not too bad either. So overall, I have to say I was quite disappointed with this game. I'm at this point now where every game needs to be absolutely amazing, and this game just didn't quite cut it. It was okay. Again, it wasn't a bad game whatsoever. It just was very flat. Not enough meat on the bones. One of those instances of all style and no substance for me. I'm sure there'll be players who do enjoy this. As I said, I am more of a Eurogamer and I prefer kind of mechanisms over kind of visuals and theme. And this one was kind of the other way around for me. So naturally, I was gonna lean away from it and not favour the game. But I'm sure there'll be people out there who enjoy it. And I unfortunately, I can't recommend someone to go get it. Reasonably expensive for what it is. And yeah, I was left a bit miffed by it, a bit flat. And I generally don't feel that way about board games, and this was just one of those exceptions that I didn't quite enjoy. So that concludes my review of Court of the Dead, Mourner's Call. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sorry to be so negative. The game is going to get a mediocre verdict from me. I don't give too many of those out, but unfortunately this is one of those. If you have enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.